Sometimes I have dreams where I hear a song, not a vague impression of music, not a half-formed melody I could have borrowed from something I heard last week, a fully developed song, fully developed lyrics, a melody, a tune that I have never heard before in my life, played back to me with a clarity and completeness that would embarrass most things I encounter while awake. Tuned so exactly to the type of music that I love to listen to that I wake up with complete awe that this song had somehow magically composed itself inside of my mind on the fly, sounding completely original, unlike anything I've heard before. And then, so fleeting. The moment I open my eyes, the song's intricacies slowly fade from my mind as the seconds pass by. I lie there in those first few breaths of waking, trying to hold it, humming what I can still reach, chasing a lyric that was crystalline 10 seconds ago and is already becoming air. Within a minute, it is almost entirely gone, not stored somewhere I can retrieve it, just returned, quietly, to wherever it came from. I've spent a lot of time sitting with the question that moment always leaves behind. How could something so complex, so structurally complete, so emotionally coherent just be sitting there in my subconscious without me being able to access it on demand? What part of me wrote that song? And if that part of me exists, if there is something in there capable of composition at that level, working without my conscious involvement, without my self-doubt, without my second-guessing, what else is it holding that I haven't heard yet? This is why I love my dreams. Not all of them. Not the anxious ones where I'm late for something I can't find, or the strange ones where logic bends into itself and nothing resolves. I mean the ones that feel like transmissions. The song that was sitting there. The times that I have dreams where it's a complex movie plot unraveling in my mind, full characters, rising tension, an emotional resolution that lands with real weight, assembled entirely without my waking participation. All of it telling me something I can't quite argue with, that there is a hidden connection in my mind to something deeper and greater than I could even perceive in my waking life, a version of me that doesn't wait for permission, that doesn't negotiate with fear or practicality or the 100 small reasons the waking mind invents to not make the thing. It just makes it, completely, in the dark, and then shows it to me briefly before the morning takes it back. The psychologists have frameworks for this. The subconscious as the vast mass beneath the waterline, the conscious mind as the thin, visible surface above it. What happens in dreams, they suggest, is the hidden machinery running without the overseer present. And what it produces when left entirely to itself is this. Songs you've never heard, films you've never seen, emotional experiences of startling precision and depth. There's something both humbling and quietly electric about that, because it means the depth is there, in all of us. The creative intelligence operating below awareness isn't reserved for the exceptionally gifted. It's structural. It's human. The dream song isn't an anomaly. It's a message, a reminder of what's available when the noise of the waking world finally stops and something older and deeper takes the floor. The only question is whether we're paying attention when it does. So let me ask you this. Have you ever woken from a dream carrying something? A song, a story, a feeling, an idea that felt too complete, too real, too fully formed to have come from nowhere? And if you could learn to listen to that place more deliberately, more often, what do you think it's been trying to create through you? The dream doesn't speak in plain language. That's the first thing worth understanding. It doesn't send a memo. It doesn't sit you down and explain itself clearly, with a beginning, a middle, and a conclusion. It speaks the way poetry speaks, obliquely, through image and feeling and symbol, through the emotional texture of a scene rather than its literal content. And if you approach it expecting directness, you'll miss everything it's actually saying. I've been paying attention to my dreams for a long time now, not in a rigid, clinical way, not with a textbook open on the nightstand or a rigid system of symbol interpretation, more like the way you learn to read a person,
over time, through pattern, through noticing what keeps coming back, what keeps showing up wearing different costumes but carrying the same emotional weight. Because that's the thing about recurring dream material. The specific imagery changes, the setting, the characters, the narrative logic, all of it shifts and rearranges. But the feeling underneath stays consistent, and that feeling is the message. I've had dreams set in places I've never been that feel exactly like places I know intimately. Dreams featuring people I've never met who feel like representations of something in me, not someone else at all, but a facet of myself I haven't fully examined yet. Dreams where I'm searching for something I can't name, in a building that keeps adding rooms, down corridors that don't resolve. And I've learned not to ask what the building means. I ask instead, what does searching feel like in this dream? What is the quality of the seeking? Is it urgent? Is it calm? Is it starting to feel familiar? The answer to that tells me far more than any symbol dictionary ever could. Freud thought dreams were wish fulfillment, the unconscious releasing what the waking self suppresses. Jung went further, arguing that dreams are the psyche's attempt to balance itself, that what appears in the night is precisely what the day has been ignoring. The emotion you didn't let yourself feel, the question you've been avoiding, the part of yourself you've been too busy or too afraid or too comfortable to sit with. I find that framework quietly compelling, not as dogma, but as a way of listening. Because when I look back at certain periods of my life and the dreams I was having during them, there's a correspondence that's hard to dismiss. The dreams were tracking something, running a parallel commentary on what was happening in my interior life that my waking mind was too occupied to fully register. They weren't predicting the future. They were reflecting the present, the real present, not the managed, curated version I was presenting to the world and sometimes to myself. That's what I mean when I say there's a hidden connection in my mind to something deeper and greater than I can even perceive in my waking life. The dream isn't supernatural. It's more honest than that. It's just the part of you that doesn't edit, that doesn't perform, that has no investment in the story you're telling about yourself, only in what's actually true. And when you learn to listen to it that way, not as entertainment, not as anxiety noise, but as genuine communication from a deeper layer of yourself, it changes things. You start to feel less alone inside your own life, because something down there is paying attention. Something has been keeping track the whole time, and it's been trying to reach you. So let me ask you this. Is there a dream that has stayed with you? One that keeps returning or simply never left? And when you sit with the feeling of it rather than the story of it, what do you think it's actually been trying to tell you all along? When you're young, the world seems new. Not just new in the way that things are technically unfamiliar, but new in the way that everything carries a kind of charge. A tree isn't just a tree, it's something worth stopping for. A puddle after rain is a portal. A cardboard box is architecture. The ordinary world hums with a frequency that children can hear, and most adults have, somewhere along the way, slowly stopped listening for. Everything can seem more vibrant, fascinating, magnificent, intriguing. And then, gradually, it doesn't. I've thought about this a lot, the dulling, because it doesn't happen all at once. That's the insidious thing about it. Nobody wakes up one morning and decides to stop finding the world remarkable. It happens in increments. Each year adds another layer of familiarity, of pattern recognition, of the brain doing its efficient work of categorizing and filing and moving on. That's a tree. That's a sunset. Seen it. Filed. Next. The brain gets very good at this, and in getting good at it, it quietly robs you of something. But here's what I keep coming back to. What if I could channel that inner child within me, seeing the world with wonder again, invoking my own imagination the way I did when I was a kid? And the answer I've arrived at, the one that keeps proving itself true, is that it's very possible. It can take a little mental practice, but it's definitely there. The capacity never left. It just went quiet. And there are many ways to bring it back. What I like to do is bring my mental focus around something visually, slowly, deliberately. Not the efficient brain glance that identifies and moves on, but the kind of sustained looking that a child does. The kind where you're not cataloging, you're receiving. Where you let the thing in front of you be more than its category. A flame, the grain of a wooden surface, the way clouds move when you actually watch them rather than merely notice them. You stay with it long enough that something shifts. The brain's filing system gets overwritten, and what replaces it, even briefly, is something that feels very much like the original wonder, recovered, dusted off, still intact. And then I channel imagination to do the rest. That's the move. Because imagination isn't just fantasy. It's not just invented worlds and impossible things. Imagination is the capacity to extend what's real into what's possible. To look at what is and ask, what if? To take the actual and follow it further than logic alone would go. I think about what imagination means to me. It's exactly that, closing my eyes and bringing a certain image to mind that may or may not exist in reality. It's almost as if I were a child and my mind were trying to fill in a blank, to predict something I haven't encountered yet. An extension of my reality, built from fragments of everything I've seen and felt and wondered about. There's something quietly radical about doing this as an adult. The world will not encourage you to do it. The world, generally speaking, prefers you to be efficient, categorized, productive, practical. It has very little patience for a grown person lying in the grass watching clouds or spending 20 minutes with a candle flame going somewhere private inside their own mind. But channeling that imagination enriches me. It inspires me to think of possibilities. It returns me to a version of myself that is lighter, more curious, more open to being surprised. And I think that version is worth the practice. So, let me ask you this. When did you last let yourself look at something ordinary for long enough that it became extraordinary again? And what would it mean for your life right now, your actual daily life, if you started doing that on purpose? Most people think of imagination as something passive, a thing that happens to you, a daydream that drifts in uninvited, the mind wandering during a meeting or in the shower or in that half-conscious space just before sleep. Something pleasant maybe, but not serious, not something you'd put on a resume or defend in a boardroom, not a tool. That framing, I think, is one of the more costly mistakes a person can make. Because imagination, real imagination, deliberately invoked, is one of the most powerful cognitive instruments available to a human being. It is the space where every solution that doesn't yet exist is currently being assembled. Every business that hasn't launched, every conversation that hasn't happened, every version of your life you haven't lived yet. All of it is being held, right now, in the space that most people dismiss as fantasy. And you have full access to it, anytime you want. What I like to do is bring my mental focus around something visually. That's the entry point for me, the image. Not words, not logic, not a plan on a page, an image. Because the imagination speaks in pictures before it speaks in anything else. It's the native language of the deeper mind. And when you give it a strong enough image to work with, it does something remarkable. It begins to move, to extend, to fill in what isn't there yet with what could be. I think about what imagination means to me. It's exactly that, closing my eyes and bringing a certain image to mind that may or may not exist in reality, and then following it, letting it develop the way a photograph develops in a dark room, slowly, detail by detail, until something that was invisible becomes visible and real. This is not escapism, I want to be clear about that. Escapism is using imagination to avoid the present. What I'm describing is using imagination to expand it, to take the actual circumstances of your life and project them forward, sideways, inward, to see them from angles that straight rational thinking can't reach. The imagination doesn't replace your reason. It scouts ahead of it. It returns with information that reason alone could never have gathered. Athletes have known this for decades. The visualization practice, running the race in the mind before running it in the body, feeling the form, the breath, the finish line, isn't superstition. It's neurological. The brain, in significant ways, does not distinguish between a vividly imagined experience and a real one. The same pathways fire. The same preparation occurs. The body gets ready for something the imagination has already rehearsed. But you don't have to be an athlete for this to apply. Channeling that imagination enriches me. It inspires me to think of possibilities, not just as abstract concepts, but as felt realities. When I imagine something vividly enough, it stops being hypothetical. It becomes familiar. And familiar things are easier to move toward. The distance between where you are and where you want to be shrinks when your imagination has already made the journey several times. This is the practice, not wishful thinking, not passive fantasy, active, deliberate use of the most underrated faculty you have. The inner child who saw everything as possible wasn't wrong. They were just using a tool that nobody told them to keep. So, let me ask you this. Is there something in your life right now, a decision, a direction, a version of yourself you haven't fully stepped into, that you've been approaching only with logic? And what might open up if you closed your eyes, built the image of it first, and let your imagination walk through it before your reason did?
I often find myself pondering the various mysteries that randomly cross my mind from time to time. Not always deep philosophical ones, sometimes just, what would it be like if I could magically teleport to Jupiter, to see this planet up close and personal, in real life, not through photographs, not through the clean, processed images that arrive via spacecraft and get posted online, with captions that somehow make the incomprehensible seem manageable. I mean actually be there, floating in front of it, the full reality of it pressing against my senses. That great swirling surface, the storms that have been raging for longer than human civilization has existed, the bands of amber and ivory and rust moving in silence at speeds no language was built to describe. The scale of it, a planet so large that more than 1,000 Earths could fit inside it, close enough to feel rather than just know. I think about what that would do to a person, because there's a difference between understanding something intellectually and experiencing it with your whole body. I know Jupiter is enormous, the way I know that the universe is 13.8 billion years old, as a fact that my mind accepts and immediately fails to actually contain. The number arrives, gets filed, and life continues. But to be there, to have that scale become undeniable and physical and present, I think something would shift in a way it can never shift from reading about it. It's still mind-boggling to me to even fathom that somewhere out there, beyond Earth, beyond the sky, there are other worlds, so distant, just floating gracefully through space and time, some as old as time itself, worlds that existed before our sun ignited, worlds that have been turning in silence in the dark for billions of years without a single observer to register them. And here we are, on this one, worrying about traffic. If only I could teleport, I would teleport to another solar system, not just to the edge of ours, though that alone would be enough to rewire everything. I mean further,
to one of the thousands of confirmed exoplanets now cataloged by astronomers, to stand on the surface of a world orbiting a different star entirely, look up at a sky that has never contained the sun I was born under, and understand in my body, not just in my mind, that the universe is not a backdrop, it is the main event. We are the small thing inside it, not the other way around. There's a word philosophers sometimes use for this feeling, the overview effect. It's what astronauts describe when they see Earth from orbit for the first time, the sudden visceral understanding that borders are invented, that the categories we fight over are invisible from any sufficient distance, that the whole of human history has occurred on a pale blue dot that from Jupiter would be invisible to the naked eye. You don't need to go to space to begin to feel this. You just have to let the real scale of things land occasionally. Let it in past the part of the mind that normalizes everything for the sake of daily function. Let it be as strange as it actually is. The universe has been here for nearly 14 billion years. We have been here for the briefest, most improbable sliver of that. And right now, in this moment, on this particular rock, we are aware of it. We can think about Jupiter. We can imagine standing on it. That capacity alone is extraordinary enough to stop me in my tracks some days. So let me ask you this. If you could teleport anywhere in the known universe, not for a reason, not for science, just for the pure, overwhelming experience of it, where would you go? And what do you think it would change in you to finally see it with your own eyes?
There are more stars in the observable universe than grains of sand on every beach on Earth. I've known that fact for years, and I still don't fully believe it. Not in my body, not the way you believe something that has actually landed. It arrives each time like the first time, briefly staggering, then immediately smoothed over by the part of the brain that normalizes everything just to keep the day moving. But lately, I've been sitting with the implications of it more deliberately, because the number of stars is only the beginning. Around many of those stars, most of them, current estimates suggest, there are planets. And among those planets, a meaningful fraction orbit within the zone where liquid water could exist, where temperatures are not too hostile, where the conditions for something like life are at least theoretically present. We are not talking about a handful of candidates. We are talking about billions. Billions of worlds right now turning in silence around their own suns. Some older than Earth by billions of years. Some younger, still geologically violent, still finding their footing. Some perhaps strikingly similar to this one, blue and green and wrapped in cloud, with oceans and weather and something like seasons. And some so alien that no framework we currently possess could prepare us for what standing on their surface would feel like. And I find myself returning to the same question, the one that I think is the most quietly vertiginous question available to a human mind right now. What if some of them have life? Not necessarily life that builds cities or writes music or asks questions about the universe. Life in any form. A microbe in a subsurface ocean, an organism breathing chemistry we've never classified, something that grows, responds, persists, something that is, by any reasonable definition, alive, on a world that has never heard of Earth, orbiting a star that has no name in any human language. If that's true, and the mathematics suggests it is almost certainly true somewhere, then we are not alone in the universe in any meaningful sense. We are simply very far apart. That distance is almost impossible to feel. The nearest star system to our own is over 4 light years away. A light year, the distance light travels in a full year, moving at 186,000 miles per second. The closest potentially habitable exoplanet we found is over 4 times further than that. By any spacecraft we currently possess, the journey would take tens of thousands of years. So we will not be meeting anyone soon. And yet the knowing changes something, or it should. It has changed something in me. Because if other worlds exist, worlds with their own histories, their own forms of beauty, their own inner experience,
then what we have here is not the default. It is not the standard against which everything else is measured. It is one version, one extraordinary, specific, unrepeatable version of what a world can be. One particular arrangement of water and carbon and light that somehow produced us. And that specificity, once you feel it, makes everything more precious and more strange simultaneously. The grass, the particular quality of morning light through leaves, the fact that this world has music on it, that it has people who lie awake wondering about other worlds. These are not guaranteed features of existence. They are this world's specific gifts, and we are here for them right now, which is the only time we will ever be. So let me ask you this. If you knew with certainty that another world existed somewhere in the universe with its own form of life, its own version of beauty, its own inner experience, what would that change about how you see this one? And what would you want that other world to know about us if it could somehow hear?
When I sit back and observe my own behavior, I like to take note of things that my mind naturally fixates on. Not the things I decide to think about, the things the mind returns to on its own, without instruction. The ideas, objects, concepts it keeps circling back to, sometimes for days, sometimes for years, as if there's unfinished business there. As if full understanding hasn't been achieved yet, and the mind refuses to file it away until it has. Fixation. How fascinating is it that a mind will perceive something, an idea, a person, a concept, and constantly return to that idea, trying to understand it from many different angles, as if taking a magnifying glass and trying to learn all of its intricacies, mystified by its beauty or perhaps troubled by the possible dangers it can pose. I find this compulsive returning quietly remarkable, because the mind doesn't fixate randomly. It fixates on things that carry charge, things that contain more than they initially appear to. And the fixation is really just the mind's way of saying, there's more here. Keep looking. One of the things that comes to mind immediately when I think of fixation is material objects, specifically hardware. I love hardware. The sleek designs, form factors, thinness, the shapes and colors of a smartphone. I'm mesmerized by the engineering behind it all, the almost obsessive design quality behind the technology these days. And I've thought about why this particular fixation runs so deep in me, because it isn't really about the object, is it? It never is. The object is the surface. What lies underneath the fixation is something more interesting. What draws me to a beautifully designed piece of hardware is the same thing that draws me to a well-written sentence, or a piece of architecture that makes you stop mid-step, or a photograph that gets the light exactly right. It's the evidence of intention, the proof that a human being, or a team of human beings, cared so much about a thing that they refused to let it be merely functional. They pushed past utility into something that approaches art. A smartphone held in the hand, the particular weight of it, the radius of the corners, the way the glass meets the metal at the edge, none of that happens by accident. Every millimeter of it was argued over by someone. Every material choice was tested against 100 alternatives. The thinness you feel when you pick it up is the result of years of engineering problem solving that never shows its work. You just feel the outcome. You just feel that this is right. That's what fixation recognizes, rightness, the sense that something has been taken as seriously as it deserves to be taken. And in a world full of things made quickly and cheaply and carelessly, encountering something made with genuine obsessive care produces a specific feeling, almost like relief, like proof that attention itself still has value. I think that's what my fixations are tracking ultimately, not the objects themselves, the quality of mind behind them, the evidence of someone else's deep caring expressed in physical form.
And when I find it, in a device, in a building, in a song, in a sentence, something in me recognizes it immediately. The way you recognize a frequency you've been listening for. The magnifying glass turns, and there it is. Another person's fixation, made into something the world can hold. So let me ask you this. What does your mind return to without being asked? Not what you think you should care about, but what your attention keeps moving toward on its own, when no one is watching and nothing is required of you. And have you ever stopped to ask what that fixation is actually trying to show you?
There's a particular kind of person who can't just be interested in something. They have to go all the way in. They have to know everything about it, the history, the mechanics, the philosophy behind the philosophy. They read every book, follow every thread, stay up later than they should because the thing won't let them go, and they don't particularly want it to. They talk about it at dinner when no one asked. They find it everywhere, in unrelated conversations, in things they read, in the texture of a completely different subject that somehow connect back to the one they can't stop thinking about. You probably know someone like this. You might be someone like this. I am absolutely someone like this. And for a long time, I thought of it as a liability, an excess, the inability to engage with something casually, to simply appreciate a thing without needing to consume it entirely. There's a version of this quality that reads as obsessive in the clinical sense, exhausting to others, destabilizing to yourself, the kind of There's a particular kind of person who can't just be interested in something. They have to go all the way in. They have to know everything about it, the history, the mechanics, the philosophy behind the philosophy. They read every book, follow every thread, stay up later than they should because the thing won't let them go, and they don't particularly want it to. They talk about it at dinner when no one asked. They find it everywhere, in unrelated conversations, in things they read, in the texture of a completely different subject that somehow connect back to the one they can't stop thinking about. You probably know someone like this. You might be someone like this. I am absolutely someone like this. And for a long time, I thought of it as a liability, an excess, the inability to engage with something casually, to simply appreciate a thing without needing to consume it entirely. There's a version of this quality that reads as obsessive in the clinical sense, exhausting to others, destabilizing to yourself, the kind of intensity that burns through things and people and leaves a kind of scorched earth behind. But there's another version, and I think it's one of the most generative forces available to a human being. Because here's what I've noticed. The things I have loved most obsessively, the ideas, the subjects, the creative territories I couldn't walk away from, those are also the things I've gone deepest in. The places where I've produced something that surprised me, where the work stopped feeling like work and started feeling like following a signal that only I could hear. Obsession, in this sense, is not a distraction from the work, it is the work's source. The great makers, the ones whose output has a quality that stops you, that feels like it came from somewhere beyond ordinary effort, almost universally describe something closer to compulsion than discipline behind it. Not sitting down dutifully at a scheduled hour to produce a required output, being pulled, being unable to not make the thing. The obsession doing the driving while the conscious self holds on and tries to keep up. I think about what this means for how we're taught to work, the productivity frameworks, the structured schedules, the advice to build systems and habits and sustainable practices that remove the reliance on inspiration. All of that has its place, but it can miss something essential, that the deepest creative work doesn't come from a system, it comes from a fire, and the fire is fed by fixation. The question isn't whether to be obsessed. The question is whether you're obsessed with the right things. Things that open outward rather than spiraling inward on themselves. Things that the more you pursue them, the more they give back, to you and eventually to someone else. Because the beautiful obsession eventually overflows. It has to.
The person who goes deep enough into anything, a craft, an idea, a question, a form, eventually produces something from that depth that other people didn't know they needed until they encountered it. The obsession becomes a gift, not despite its intensity, but because of it. I keep coming back to the hardware, the design, the engineering, but also the writing, the psychology, the questions about how people work and why they are the way they are. These fixations aren't separate. They're all part of the same reaching toward understanding, toward beauty, toward the satisfaction of a thing done with complete attention. The beautiful obsession knows no half measures, and I've stopped apologizing for that. So let me ask you this. What is the thing you've always gone too deep into? The subject or craft or question that other people engage with casually while you disappear entirely? And what would happen if instead of moderating that intensity, you pointed it at something that actually deserved everything you have?